counsel, Melanie Ash, who's taken the lead in the on the staff in developing the preamble, and then we're going to work it. Melanie?
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to see you all remotely this time to the Commission. And we are excited to engage in this conversation with you today over the preamble. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So as you all will recall, in some of our earlier meetings, the commissioners have expressed an interest in creating a preamble, as Chair just summarized for you. The staff went and did some research to identify other preambles around the country and around the world. And at a prior meeting, we presented examples of those preambles to the commissioners for some discussion. At that time, commissioners requested that the staff and the commission itself, engage with New Yorkers to try to identify what foundational values were New York City values. What did New Yorkers feel were important, were the important foundational values that should be guiding government? In order to do that, we the commission hosted a virtual input session on foundational values. We also received public input through several other forums, one of which was a form that was launched on the website to obtain input from New Yorkers on foundational values. If we could go to the next slide. So taking that information, a draft preamble was created by staff, incorporating the input that we received from commissioners at the public meetings, as well as from New Yorkers at the dedicated foundational values input session and other public input sessions around the city, and as well as from panelists at the panel discussions and through online submission forms. The commissioners have provided comments and proposed additional edits to the initial draft. And so what we have now is a revised draft preamble. And the revised draft incorporates all of the feedback that we have received from commissioners to date. And I believe a copy of that revised draft was circulated to commissioners in advance of this meeting. However, there have been some additional feedback has been received in between then and now. So you'll see a version today that is slightly revised from the version that you would have received in your email. So the revised draft preamble has 4 component parts. First would be a statement of values. Second, a vision for a just New York City. Third, a historical acknowledgement. And fourth, a call to action. So we're going to go through all 4 of these parts and show them here on the screen so the commissioners to review. And then we would love to open up the floor for discussion and comment and further edits. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at the statement of values. If it would be easier, I'm not sure if everyone has access to read the screen, but we can read it out if you'd like, or we can allow you to read it yourself.
May I just ask very quickly, would you like the commissioners to comment once you, after you've presented the preamble in its entirety, or would you like them to comment, like us to comment as we go through the slides?
Well, I thought we could go through all of the slides for the first time, see them all once, and then we could go back and commissioners could identify a particular section they would like to comment on. We could go back to that slide. But if others would feel so moved, they could feel free to jump in if they want to stop us. But that was my initial thought.
I think that's a good thought. That way we can see it in its entirety and then come back slide by slide.
Okay, so in this first section, obviously we describe this as a statement of values. I think I wasn't planning on reading it, but if someone would like me to, please say so and I can do that.
It might be helpful for those who are perhaps could use the assistance with the literacy.
Sure. So the part 1, the statement of values, starts off, we, the people of New York City, declare that our city is an incomparable mosaic and that our diversity is our strength. We honor and respect the cultures, languages, and histories of all who call and have called this city home. And we celebrate their revolutionary imagination, courage, and resiliency. Second paragraph reads, We strive to be a city where the worth, talents, and contributions of every New Yorker are valued and recognized, and where equity and inclusiveness, community empowerment, accessibility, and opportunity for every New Yorker are the unwavering standards to which we are held accountable in all aspects of governance, business, and service delivery. If we go to the next slide, this is part 2, which we've titled, just for the purposes of this conversation, Envisioning a Just New York City. And that section reads, we endeavor to ensure that every New Yorker has the opportunity to thrive with a healthy and supported family, a safe, healthy, and sustainable living environment, a resilient neighborhood served by quality and accessible infrastructure, including roads, parks, transportation, and a robust local economy, a dignified living with the opportunity to prosper economically and build wealth, safe, secure, and affordable housing, quality, culturally relevant education and childhood supports, compassionate, culturally responsive, and informed healthcare and mental health services, access and opportunity to participate meaningfully in government decision-making, and a government responsive to that participation, and humane and respectful treatment from all city agencies. And then the third slide, part 3, as we've described it here today, is a historical acknowledgement. And it reads, we recognize that New York City sits on the traditional territories of the original inhabitants, the Munsee Lenape, Canarsie, Wappinger, and other indigenous peoples, and we honor their stewardship of the land by protecting our environment and all living things. We also acknowledge the grave injustices and atrocities that form part of our city's history, including the forced labor of enslaved Africans, the colonialism that displaced indigenous people from their lands, the devaluing and underpaying of immigrant workers, and the discrimination, segregation, and other forms of violence against marginalized groups, including, but not limited to, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, and other people of color, women, religious minorities, immigrants, LGBTQ+ individuals, and people with disabilities. And the final section, part 4, we've described as a call to action for the future. And that reads, we condemn the legacies of those harms, and we act intentionally to ensure that our city's foundations, structures, and laws promote justice and equity for all New Yorkers, and that the collective values set out in this preamble ground the operation of our city government and inform and shape how the city carries out the duties, obligations, and authorities, and upholds and protects the rights set out in the charter. The final paragraph reads, we, the people of New York City, united in our resolve to build a just and equitable city for all, honor the contributions of all those New Yorkers who have suffered in the name of freedom and who fought, struggled, and dreamed for a better life and a better city. Together, standing on their shoulders, we move boldly toward a brighter tomorrow for ourselves, our children, and future generations. So if we could perhaps put up on the screen the full text of the Word version, then we can see it all on one screen, and we can open the conversation to the commissioners to discuss anything they'd like to about that draft, give us their feedback, suggestions, ideas.
So there's part of me that's wondering if we should actually put, is there a way to split screen or like put the first?
The first slide rather than the entire document.
Right.
Okay, Harold, would you be able to put the PowerPoint back up, or the PowerPoint back up to the first section of the?
You could put do you have the entire document so we can see it all at once before we do that?
Yeah, yes, we can put the entire document. I'm sorry.
Commissioner Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a friendly suggestion on the first slide, the word worth. If we could substitute that to value as opposed to worth. Worth often refers to monetary ability, and we don't want to have it's precisely the impression that people are valued not on what the level of the bank account, but that we use the word value instead of worth.
Mhm.
Is it possible to make the copy a little bit larger?
We strive to be a city where the worth, I would suggest the word value or values, right? Talent and contributions.
Mhm.
Just a friendly amendment. Thank you.
And perhaps if doing that, then towards the end of that phrase, maybe instead of are valued and recognized, change that to are recognized and embraced, or something along those lines. Commissioner Daniel Favors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the first section, second paragraph, second sentence, we honor and respect the cultures, languages, and histories of all who call and have called this city home, out of recognition for the fact that we are sitting on indigenous land. I would suggest as opposed to city, that we say land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that maybe instead or in addition to talking about mosaic, we say that in a city and country built on the backs of slavery and racialized colonialism, the only democracy possible is a multiracial democracy. Something like that, I would suggest, which I think is a stronger statement than saying we're a mosaic.
So what is the language? Just help me for a second. I just want to follow you. What is the language you'd like to replace mosaic and insert?
Multiracial democracy is the language, basically, I'm trying to suggest, which is explicitly not colorblindness, explicitly not we're all individuals and race doesn't matter.
I got you. Yep. And let's just make sure that we capture Commissioner Garrido's note in the second paragraph. The word worth, let's change that to values. Or the value, forgive me, value. And then towards the end of that, take out the D. And at the end, let's make it or recognized. I'm just off the top of my head, recognized and embraced. Towards the end of that sentence, that first line. So we're not repeating the word or value.
Instead of valued and recognized, we're saying recognized and embraced, if I understood you correctly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mata?
Can you go a little lower where it says access and opportunity and decision making? Access and opportunity to participate meaningful in government decision making and a government responsive to that participation. Like, I like this particular bullet point, but I want to be a bit more bold, and I guess like when I saw this, like I thought about how immigrants, undocumented individuals are constantly being left out of meaningful government decision making, and especially when it comes to voting. So I'm just wondering, like, what can we put there? Access and opportunity to participate in meaningful government decision making, regardless of immigration status. I'm just trying to think of something where I do want to include that and be more bold on that.
So I think we have to, I'm just going to jump in here and I don't want to go back and forth on this. We're speaking about every New Yorker at the outset. And so when we talk about every New Yorker, maybe it's more that we need to, are we talking about how do we define New Yorkers? Because we're making this not based on citizenship, but just based on overall, like, are you a New Yorker who resides here? I don't know if we should, in the preamble, start getting into like voting and like, aren't we implying all New Yorkers, regardless of immigration status, citizenship status?
Would it be possible, Madam Chair, to state that at that beginning sentence, we endeavor to ensure that every New Yorker, regardless of status, so that we don't have several years from now some creative lawyer, and I'm putting creative in all the sarcastic fonts I can, making some sort of carve out for residents who perhaps do not have lawful permanent status? Would it be possible to make that just right there at the beginning, regardless of, and then Commissioner Mata, I can't remember the specific language you use, but if we include it there, then we prevent, well, minimize, crafty lawyers will do what we do, but we can at least minimize the ability to create carve-outs based on citizenship at some later time.
How about the expression for all? So that when you say acts as an opportunity for all, as an indication that is, as opposed to getting into an immigration, non-immigration status. Just a suggestion.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And that's what I meant, like make it very general, but when, you know, being purposeful, that includes like immigrants and being inclusive of all, like, yeah, I like how regardless of status and for all, it's very general.
Just the for all will not fit in there in terms of the language. It doesn't work. I guess I have to ask the question is why regardless of status does not capture for all?
It goes to the in my opinion, Madam Chair, the problem is it goes to the very definition of New Yorkers, right? So, you know, for some New Yorkers mean people born and raised in New York.
Right.
Maybe, you know, for others, New Yorkers are those who reside in New York, whether they are immigrants or people of color who have, you know, even transient people who are visiting right now. The implication is that if you're visiting, if you're in a visiting status, you're not a New Yorker. So, you know.
So are we really talking about people who reside in New York?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Are we talking about people who reside in New York? Like that's like, if that's what we're beginning, should we speak specifically to that? Every New Yorker or we've endeavored to ensure that all who reside in New York City, regardless of status, have the opportunity to thrive.
See, the problem I have with this is if you start delineating that level, then it gets to what status, right? Marital status, you know, immigration status, economic status. It gets to a point where it goes crazy. That's why I was trying to, not very eloquently, interject the word for all somewhere as a way of catch-all phrase that would allow us to do that without necessarily getting into that. Because even if you go to the first bullet point and you say a healthy and a supportive family, right? You have an opportunity to do that. You know, the definition of a family, right? A traditional family comes into effect. So, you know, you almost have to say healthy and supportive family for everyone who wants a family. Somebody may not want to be in a position. Somebody want to be an individual who doesn't want to strive for a family, may feel, well, I'm being disenfranchised for that. So I just think that, I would prefer if the lead sentence that says we endeavor to ensure that every New Yorker, that if we work on that rather than get to every bullet point that follows, so that we don't get into the minutia of what does that mean over that, you know?
I agree with you. That's exactly where I'm going. And I guess the question that I'm posing to you all is, do we need to define what it means to be a New Yorker? And I believe that's what Commissioner Daniel Favors was doing with the regardless of status. But what does that mean if you take it to the next step? Like, it begs the question, are we talking immigration? Are we talking socioeconomic status? Like, what are we talking? Such that every New Yorker does not suffice, is not all inclusive.
I guess when I, like, regardless of status, now I see what Commissioner Garrido was saying. I guess for me, it was like regardless of citizenship. Every New Yorker, regardless of citizenship or regardless of, I guess I was just thinking more of something like with the community I organize, it usually comes to like, I'm not a New Yorker because I wasn't born here, right? So I guess that's kind of what, or some people don't consider me a New Yorker because I wasn't born here. So I guess I was just coming from that side.
Could we see every New York resident?
I thought about that, but it also, for some people, that means those who have resident status. You know, if we do immigration, right?
That's,
What happens if you're undocumented and you're not a
Yeah.
resident, right?
yeah.
Well, can we argue that, well, is there a difference between being a resident of New York and having lawful residency status? Because to be overly inclusive, you know, if I'm a tourist and I'm here for 6 weeks, have I established residency? As opposed to, am I here do I have lawful permanent status to be here? I think is a separate question. But if we were to say, and I can't remember what the residency requirements are for the city of New York. I don't know if this is a matter that we would need a little additional research on, but if you properly reside here, regardless of your immigration status, then that sufficiently, I think, distinguishes this body of people that we're talking about from tourists who are not intending to reside in the city, but it would still provide a blanket covering, and it would be inclusive of all of those of us who live here, whether you happen to be a citizen or a green card holder or undocumented. If you reside in the city, you have the expectation that these rights, privileges, and benefits would inure to you as well.
I appreciate all that's being said, and I think it takes us back to, do we find ourselves in a position of having to define what residence is? Perhaps we endeavor to ensure, this is wordy, but we endeavor to ensure that every person who resides in the city of New York has the opportunity. I don't know. Every person that who, does that get at it?
Just a question. If you say we endeavor to ensure that every person or individual that resides in the city, that resides or visits the city. I mean, see, the problem we have is we have people who work in the city and have no residency requirement. You know, police, that's part of a big deal, right? So if you're part of the city government and you don't reside here, then are you excluded? But if you get to the point where you say you reside in the city and visit the city, does that kind of everybody driving through the state to get to Connecticut? So one would assume that that's the case, but I think we could get down to the point where this becomes an exercise of futility because the language is not going to be perfect no matter what. So I would just regress some of my comments and suggest, Lori, perhaps your Commissioner Daniel Favors suggestions, or perhaps as best as we could get to say, you know, regardless of status, or every New Yorker, or something to that effect. Because we start down on this road, we're going to get into trouble.
I don't have an issue with that, but for the fact that, you know, as Commissioner Daniel Favors then pointed out, we then start getting into, you know, what is the definition of status? What is the legal interpretation given it? And you know, are we centering on immigration, which often is what we talk about when talking about status? Are we centering on socioeconomics? Like, and are we okay with it being a term that is not clearly defined? I don't know, Commissioner Daniel Favors, do you want to comment on that? And then I see that Commissioner Yu wants to comment as well.
So I think that, and I'm just doing a basic Google right now, but there are essential metrics that one has to meet to be considered a resident of New York City, at least for taxation purposes. Like you have to actually be domiciled here, have a permanent place of abode, and you spend more than 30 days there. And technically, you are subjected to the tax scheme for New York City, which is what you would need in order to establish some form of residency. And I'm not at all saying that this is the definitive definition. So please, awesome staff members for the commission, this is, I think, a research question. But we have an understanding, at least in legal terms, I think we should, or I believe we do, a basic definition that one must meet in order to claim they are a resident of the city. So that, you know, it creates a carve out where if you are a tourist or if you're traveling through New York, you know, from New Jersey through New York to Connecticut, you would not necessarily perhaps be able to claim benefits that we are promulgating here. But if we're talking about people who reside here, assuming that that is a properly defined term that exists somewhere in the charter, if you reside in the city, regardless of your immigration status, then I instinctively, I feel like that's a sufficient enough umbrella that we're capturing the folks we're talking about while excluding those that we are not. But then again, you know, our constitution of the nation's constitution says all men are created equal. And we know that that was certainly interpreted to mean different things immediately thereafter. So I appreciate the desire to want to be as specific as possible and just making sure that we are covering all of our bases and getting all of our folks covered here.
Thank you. Commissioner Yu?
For that list, when we start to make the bullet points, a healthy and supported family, I agree with Henry that it should maybe read a healthy and supported individuals and families. I think we need to include individuals in recognition that not everybody has a family here. Individuals and families.
Well, you know, I'm just going to beg the question here. When we go on to what we're doing, if you look at all of those bullets, as we begin to describe what is healthy and supportive. So I'm actually beginning to wonder if you even need that bullet. Like, what are we speaking to there? We talk about dignified living, resilient neighborhood, education, childhood supports, health and mental health. So what is the healthy and supported individuals and families? Like, are we getting at, I guess what I'm saying is, are we trying to get at specific policy issues there?
I think actually that whole first bullet could be eliminated.
That's the very thing, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's everything I'm saying. That we're describing it
Below.
below.
That's right.
I think we've got 3 commissioners who are in that same position. Am I hearing that? Commissioner Coy?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Maybe we don't need that first sentence. Yeah. I mean, that first item.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to suggest that with the regardless of status, we move forward, but we hold that, you know, put a place marker there to figure out if there's anything more we need to do there. Commissioner Bermudez did put in the chat that perhaps we say people who reside or work in the city. The one concern I have, and I know Commissioner Garrido, you spoke to this as well, The one concern I have about the work is that the bullets that are provided, then, you know, if you work in New York City, but you live in New Jersey, like, are we endeavoring to ensure that they have education and childhood supports in another locality?
Actually, through a technical, if you are in the city, if you're an employee of the city and you resign elsewhere, there are exceptions that allow you to have your child in the school system, even though you don't.
Yeah, I got that, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, what I'm really speaking to is, does the city of New York have a responsibility to people who work here but live elsewhere to ensure that they live in sustainable living environments, that they live in neighborhoods that have
I hear you, and I would suggest to you by the beginning of your sentences, as every person who resides in New York, you've already fulfilled that area.
Well, no. The Commissioner Bermudez was suggesting that maybe we put reside or work. That's what I was thinking on. If you add the work, are we suggesting that the city has a responsibility for, you know, beyond livelihood? You know, a sufficient livelihood in terms of sufficient income. Do you put on the city the responsibility of, or suggest the city has a responsibility outside of the city walls around environment and other? Commissioner Coy? Do you have your Commissioner Coy, do you have your hand up, or was that from earlier? Can I be heard? Okay. I don't know if Commissioner Coy can hear us, but it looks like he's sticking his hand down. So it's good. Commissioner Garrido?
Yeah, I just saw the bullet that starts with quality and cultural relevant education. Something doesn't add up at the end with childhood supports. There's something missing there. So the opportunity to thrive with quality and cultural relevant education. And is that referring to early childhood education, childhood support? What does that mean? You know, forgive me, I don't want to be, but there's something here.
Yeah,
is that early childhood? What is that?
Melanie?
I believe that was really getting at daycare and services for young children early in childhood. So it could include, I guess, you know, pre-K, although some would call that education, but some might also call it childhood supports. But also, yeah, I think childcare was one of the things that the commissioner who suggested that had in mind.
So can I suggest the word early childhood support? Because I think that I get where it's going at, right?
Before you make the change, just let him finish, because I think we should do something else there. So please go ahead.
No, or because this is so important, I believe, but perhaps this deserves its own book and its own sentence, not just early education. And I'll say that because at an incident this week regarding an ACS child abuse case that was horrible, like 2 or 3 child abuse, that was so outrageous to me that when you talk about support, we often don't realize the children and the risk that they're in, that we try to lump that with the regular structure educational system. But there's this whole system of early childhood education, Head Start, ACS, youth and community development, like all that stuff is happening that is not tied to the educational system, i.e., you know, the Department of Education or something, that perhaps it deserves its own proper weight by either another bullet or an expansion of the current bullet to give it its due right.
So Commissioner Garrido, Vice Chair Garrido, I appreciate you raising this, and what I think the way that we could maybe build this out is that it should be quality, culturally relevant, early childhood and education supports. And then it could be in children and youth supports or something like that. Or quality, culturally relevant, early childhood and education, comma, and children and youth supports, because what we don't have here are the centering on youth services, critical youth services. Some early childhood education, early childhood and education, early childhood.
I think I think, Chair, I think that maybe part of that was supposed to be included in the healthy and supported families. And so I think it's a good point to move it more somewhere else now that we've deleted that first bullet. So I think that's a very good point, that we were thinking that it was included in that first bullet, but now that's been removed. So
we're saying early childhood and education, comma, and children and youth supports. And maybe it's critical, or I don't know, children and youth supports, but it seems like there needs to be something there that builds on the type of supports.
and that line was early childhood and education, is that right?
Correct. I'm going to ask those who are perhaps better versed in mental health and trauma to just look at that next bullet. There are many people in the, in this area of expertise who distinguish between mental health and trauma. And so we maybe need to think about, our communities are traumatized. Does not mean that they are like, it's like, like diagnosable mental health services and support. So we maybe need to do something there when we speak to trauma too.
Could we possibly add? I don't know what just happened.
I think it's our connection today.
I'll type it in the chat. It's take it.
I think if everyone who's not puts it on mute, puts their thing on mute, then hopefully it won't repeat back.
Commissioner, you know what I think? I think it's the Bain's system. Okay, Commissioner Daniel Favors, and then we're going to go to Commissioner Bain, and then come back to Commissioner Yu.
I was just, and thank you for that good Zoom detective work there. I was just saying, perhaps we could just say informed trauma care, healthcare, and mental health services, so that it's carved out as its own separate element. And I appreciate the recognition that those are not the same and they should be treated differently. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Bain?
I was just typing in the chat. Compassion is strong, empathy is stronger. I'm not sure how to make it work or fit into it. I like what we're doing though, and paying attention to this particular bullet point. I'm still processing.
Okay, thank you. And I'm seeing like empathetic is perhaps a word to be used.
Just one note for commissioners. I know with the sound issues, it's challenging, but ideally we're not going to be writing anything in the chat because the viewing public is not able to view it. So if someone does happen to write something, then we'll have someone else read it out loud so that it's visible to the or it's audible to the hearing watching public.
Thank you. So we'll take a look at and consider the language empathetic, how we can bring that in. Compassionate. Empathetic is captured in compassionate. We have to think about that. But if you can make a note of that for us to take a look at, like what is the best language there? Did we determine that we're now taking for all out of access and opportunity? I believe we thought we captured that with the person that resides in the city of. Help me, guys.
That is my recollection.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we do have a couple more commissioners who have their hands raised right now. Commissioner Yu and Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
The bullet point about early childhood and education, that reads a little clunky to me. I don't know what it is, but it reads a little awkward. If we can wordsmith that a little bit, because we say early childhood, we single that out, that's great. In education, does that encompass K through 12, right? Like, what does that mean? And so quality, culturally relevant early childhood and education.
Would say early childhood learning and education.
So let's just, I want to just let you all know, in this space, it is referred to as early childhood and education. I'm wondering if what makes it clunky is the comma between quality and culturally. You understand what I'm saying? If it said quality and culturally relevant early childhood and education.
So early childhood and education, that's a term of art, you're telling me, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Or you could say early childhood programming and education, but I think people use the early childhood and education. Or
Madam,
early childhood and K through 12 education.
I was just going to ask, is that possibly an area that could later be reinterpreted? So perhaps we could make it clear, while recognizing it's a term of art today, it might not always be. Would it, if that is the case, could we say quality and culturally relevant early childhood and comma K through 12 education? And if we intend for this to extend to the college level and secondary education, but just make those specific so that we, as language evolves and perhaps our preamble may not, so we can preempt that to the extent possible.
I think that works.
So it would be an post-secondary education after education and before children and youth supports.
I'm envisioning quality and culturally relevant early childhood, comma, K through 12, comma, and secondary. Is it secondary or post-secondary?
Post-secondary, yeah.
Post-secondary education.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I don't have my hand up.
That's fine. I see Commissioner Thompson, but if he would yield to you for a minute if you want to jump in, or Commissioner.
On this particular point, I just respectfully suggest we don't go down this road. Okay. Because there's pre-K, there's 2K, there's now a 2K program. If we start listing them all, I think education is a term that early education broadens it, because then we have to get into after school program. If you start listing them, I think we're going to go down a rabbit hole that will make this, will take away what we intend to do in the first place.
Okay. I think that, I guess, I actually think that it's a valuable point. Because I sit here and I think about, well, are we talking about 3s and 4s? Are we talking about infants and toddlers? And maybe there is some value add in actually having it be broader than defined.
And then there's adult and continuing education. So Vice Chair, that's actually a really good point. The more categories we think of, the more commas and sub paragraphs we actually may need.
Fair. Thank you. All right, then we figured that out. Commissioner Thompson?
Are we going line by line or can I jump around?
Jump up, jump around, jump down.
Okay.
I'm a rapper.
In the paragraph where we talk about, we also acknowledge the grave injustices and atrocities. It talks about all this in the past tense. It doesn't talk about the current pain and anguish caused by all these various things. And I think it reads too impersonally and like it's all something that's behind us. So I think we should have language that talks about, we acknowledge the pain that people feel, both because of the historic injustice, but also because of mass incarceration or other things we can mention that are happening right now that are causing people pain. I think that'd be stronger.
Spot on, and earlier I mentioned that I think we also need to speak to how these injustices are not by chance or happenstance, but rather are by design. And that is in part why we're doing this structural work.
Also, I wondered why we did not use the word racial segregation. When we say segregation, it opens it up to other kinds of, segregation by income. Racial segregation is specific and it was legal. And, I just think it carries more weight. And when we talk about racial segregation,
we need to name it. Thank you. So let's make sure we speak to the racial, we speak to the continuing, and we speak to the, that these injustices are, they're by design, not just, by chance. They are, and they're essentially the points that I want to make sure that we're capturing based on what Commissioner Thompson shared. Continuing injustices that, it's not just historically based, the racial segregation piece. We need to speak to the, like the structure, like how the structuring of this, the design, like how this is designed. I think he mentioned mass incarceration. So let's just make note of that we need to bring these elements in, these factors. Commissioner Coy, I believe you had a.
Around the call of action. Are we going to talk a little bit about whether we want to have some kind of like a program to level the playing field that's kind of resulted in all this racial segregation, all this like injustice? I mean, at all, or because we kind of talk about the future, the value, but then in terms of all the negatives that's been as a result of the legacy, the unequal, treatment that resulted in that level playing field is not there. So that we going to be can we talk a little bit about maybe adding in some kind of like we're going to proactively take on certain programs or something, I mean, I'm not sure we should use the word reparation or not, but that's something that I was thinking, should we have something like that in the preamble, compensation for past injustice?
I love the word reparation. It's a big word.
Commissioner Bain, if you can mute your line. Commissioner Coy, you with us?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, just want to make sure that we captured everything. So you're asking a question about whether or not we begin to center on the call to action and more like kind of more declarative statements?
Yeah, the redress is there. Should we talk a little bit? Should we talk about something, adding something about a redress or like maybe some kind of reparation or programs that we're gonna try to level the playing field so then we could move forward, or just that that we're gonna just do something different in the future?
I think you raised a very good point, and I'm just trying to figure out what we would say. And I guess part of my thinking, my concern here is we haven't yet figured out what it is. So it's hard to, in this moment, to figure out how we would then, in one sentence or two, reflect what it is that we're like, the specific things that we're going to do. So what I'm going to suggest, and if you all feel differently, please push back or let me know your thinking, is that maybe we have a placeholder for that, that for your comment, your point, for us to return to it.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that, yeah.
I think it's a most apt point, and one worth considering. I feel like we need to get a little bit, we need to get further along the road in terms of the what to be able to articulate it in this statement. Melanie, I do want to make sure that in the paragraph when we speak to the atrocities and the injustices, that we speak to the essentially that this is not happenstance, that these are structure, this is a structure.
Right. The structural point. Yeah, I've definitely made that made a note of that, and we can try to put something in here now, or we can do some drafting and circulate it.
I'm fine if you don't want to do it here. I do not want to miss that, because that is in part the reason why we're doing that we're creating the preamble and we're doing the changes.
If you have some thoughts you want us to put in right now, we can do that, or we can just put a pin and placeholder and make a note for after this. Is there some language that you can that comes to mind right now?
The first thing I'd say to you is that just when I read it, I think that the pain is the word pain is not right, is not placed in the right place. We're talking about the injustices and the atrocities, and then in the including
and the pain arising from, yeah, we should be put more detail about that, I suppose, perhaps a little later in this sentence. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that there maybe what we need something that speaks to the pain, maybe in a separate paragraph, a short paragraph. Just the pain, the enduring pain and trauma that has resulted to individuals, families, and communities. What I'm speaking to is somewhere after you go through segregation, mass incarceration, and other continuing forms of violence, there needs to be something in there about the structural nature of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I've made a note of that for sure. If you have something that we can draft now, we could definitely do that, or we could take a crack at articulating it afterwards and circulate it.
So, we don't have to do it now, but what I would ask is I just want to make sure, are there commissioners who have questions about the point I'm making or want to add to it? Phil, I see your hands up, but I think it was up from earlier, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So we good on that point? We can just come back to it, but we good on that? Okay.
Yes, I think we understand what you're looking for, and we can draft some language and circulate it.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I apologize. I don't want to belabor the point, but are we suggesting that we need language that says this enduring pain and trauma, which results from this, something along the lines of which results from the systemization of institutionalized white supremacist ideology as experienced through policies, practices, and procedures? Because that's what comes off the top of my head.
Works for me.
I like that,
I don't remember it, but
I think we need something that says this nation was founded on incompatible principles, of democracy, equality, et cetera, on the one hand, and the things that Larry just mentioned on the other hand. And this is the reason for pain and trauma suffered through the centuries and generations and so forth.
Ashe.
Bill, talking about New York preamble, not the national preamble.
Well, I think we can go straight from the nation to the city. We can say this nation and this city. And by the way, the national was written in New York, City Hall, by the way. That's where the Constitutional Congress met. But we can say this nation and this city.
Be that as it may, that representing a compendium of states. And while I agree with you, I think if you start instituting stuff that is problematic, that were even problematic in the preamble of the United States Constitution, then we may be getting into the whole discussion that our chair mentioned before, which is, do we have to go beyond the New York City? Because if we're going to be consistent with that, then that brings a whole matter. Are we part of that consequences of that mentality? Are we foundationally, were we the foundational catalyst of that inequity that you mentioned? That's where I think that you may want to just, my suggestion is that you stick to New York as a foundation.
I don't think we can. I don't think we can talk about structural racism.
I'm sorry, you don't think we can?
I don't think we cannot talk about where New York City fits in the system of federalism, both in terms of our powers, but also our limits. We cannot address, structural racism, all aspects at its core, because it's federal. It's not just in the city. And I think that needs to be clear to people in the city. Like, otherwise they'll say, well, you're not really getting at the heart of all the problems or whatever, but we can't, because it actually goes beyond the powers of the city.
So I think that we should think about how do we speak to that in this preamble that, that speaks to how what our power and authority is as a city, but how some of this is deeply rooted in the larger, the government structure in the federal. And then we need to speak to that in the introduction as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, that we do that.
Commissioner Bain, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I definitely feel the challenge of where the line or the conversation limits or the borders, or if and how
Hold on one second. I'm just going to make sure that Commissioner Thompson and everybody else is muted. Okay, go ahead, please.
I'm appreciating the discourse around the parameters of this structural conversation, because when I see, for example, a mass incarceration, I think about the other major ways in which oppression has reared its ugly head. And a lot of the conversations we had in communities talked about food justice, for example, or injustice. And I think when we look at housing, when you're in New York City and you think about red line, like, these are major pillars that have a ripple effect that we experience and deal with to date. So again, mass incarceration triggers me to list at least 3 or 4 other monumental oppressive mechanisms. But the question is, are opening it out? Are we adding more in terms of descriptive language to drive home these important points, or are we covered? So
I was unable to decipher what Commissioner Bain said in the last 5 seconds, where he began, are we able to? So I don't know, perhaps others have heard, or if you could just repeat that again or put it in the chat and we'll read it out. I just couldn't make it out.
What I thought he was alluding to was, I thought like how in discussing mass incarceration, it just triggers a bunch of policies. And what I thought he was speaking to was that some are local, some are state, some are federal. And so there's a need to, you know, put this stuff sort of in context. That's what I thought I was hearing.
Okay. Commissioner Davey, you've been listening along. Are there any thoughts that you'd like to add? Any comments?
No, nothing of any substance. Just appreciated the conversation and the edits made by my colleagues. I did have one minor thing that I saw, and then I thought I might do it offline because it's so trivial. But since I've been called on, I might mention it. There is somewhere at the beginning of the document where we say we honor their tradition, memories, I forget, by our treatment of the environment. And I wondered if that should be a little more conditional and say something to the effect that we would honor their stewardship of the land by protecting, or something to that effect. It makes it sound as if, when I read it, that it is as if we're already doing it, and we know that we're a long way from protecting the environment and all living things. So rather than just saying we making a declarative statement that we honor, condition it somehow.
Very much appreciate it. So maybe it's we, you know, along the lines of I'm sorry, I'm reading.
I just wrote in a proposal aiming to or something like that.
I think that the condition was supposed to be on the honor, though, if I understood it correctly. We endeavor to honor, or we.
I think that's right. That's exactly where I was going, Melanie, that we endeavor to honor. Can I ask us to step back for a moment and just reflect upon the document on the whole, and consider the question of whether or not it sets forth a vision that is inclusive, that is both aspirational and feels achievable if New Yorkers are so committed. Does it strike you as a preamble that is there anything that's missing that we haven't already spoken to? How does it grab you?
I'll just start. The substance, I think it grabs me, as very rich. The language at times, I feel almost like it's a legal affidavit as opposed to a declarative, here's where we stand. It's like, you know, we we condemn, we acknowledge, we recognize, we endeavor, we strive, rather than just saying, New York is stronger when the worth, talents, and contributions of every New Yorkers are valued and recognized. etc., period. Rather than we strive. Just say, this is what we stand, and voters, are you with that or not? And if they say yes, then that's the statement of the voters. Anyway, that's just a stylistic, maybe it's just me, but I always think back to Thomas Jefferson. That was bold, whether he was a hypocrite or not, it definitely sounded good, you know?
I think those are fair points. Others? Commissioner Bermudez, I know that you are traveling, but I want to make sure that your voice is in here as well if you'd like, and perhaps you can't talk and can only chat. So I just want to make sure.
No, I'm actually very good with the conversation if you can understand me, but I'm about to board a plane, so I'll keep trying to monitor the situation.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, I think Commissioner Bain has written some language into the chat.
Please read it, or if you'd like, I can read it.
Sure, he says, mass incarceration triggers for me related oppressions that are currently relevant, such as, but not limited to, food injustice, redlining, or discrimination in housing, health disparities perpetuated.
As I read that, I can't help but think about a conversation had in one of our earlier working group sessions just today about the importance of us in our work centering on all of the kind of like the domino effects or the, you know, the intersectional issues and the, you know, he uses the word trigger, but, you know, mass incarceration not being just for the purpose of locking up Black and brown men and women, but knowing how being locked up deprives the family of critical resources that in turn, you know, challenge them to live and thrive. And the importance of us as a charter commission, racial justice commission, calling that out and looking at how the changes we make also must have that domino effect of the reversal domino effect. Question is Commissioner Bain suggesting that we speak more to that in terms of the acknowledged harms, or is he just using that as an example? And while I'm waiting to hear from him, if Commissioner Coy, do you have another comment?
You know, regarding the pain and trauma, I thought maybe there's a little bit more than just the pain and trauma, but maybe the loss of opportunity and generational gap, you know, due to the structural racism for the people, you know, is it possible to add in something like that, the loss of economic opportunity and generational wealth?
I think that's important. Thank you. Essentially, what you're speaking to is there's both the systems and then what the systems have produced.
That's right. That deprive, you know, the opportunity for many, you know, of us, you know, our forefathers, you know, yeah.
Which ties in with some of what Commissioner Bain is saying as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Or asset as well, you know, maybe that's just part of the generational wealth asset, financial asset.
So, are there other comments, considerations?
Yeah. In the second paragraph, and I'm okay with this. I just want to check with that everyone else is okay with this. And where it says that unwavering standards to which we are held accountable in all aspects of governance, business, and service delivery. Now, for a city charter, I could see governance and service delivery because the city, that's the city. Are we saying we're going to hold business accountable? Because that's not the city. That is private companies and corporations. What are we, I'm just raising that as an issue.
You know, I would ask Ganesh and Melanie to jump in here, but my thinking here is that what you're really centering on is, you know, how do we speak to those who do business in this city? Do those who do business in this city get off the hook because they're not, you know, they're not part of the government structure?
Right.
Is there a distinction being made between those who do business in the city and those who do business with the city?
I think that what the, I'm speaking for them, but I think the intention was both.
That would be my preference.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine some of the challenges that might come for the inclusion of both. But I can eagerly imagine the joy that would come from having to litigate that and argue about that at some later time. But that might be a distinction that later becomes more of a discussion point.
But I guess if we think about it, let's just, and I'm going to ask those who more familiar with, you know, some of the agencies that exist today or the mayor's offices. Let's go from consumer protection to human rights, small business services, MWBE. I'm just thinking about business, the business sector, the private sector, and you know, we as a city do regulate, you know, with respect to certain, there are regulations in place and there are terms by which businesses must abide to do business in and or with the city. So we're already doing it. I mean, you can't be a business with 100 employees and engage in wage discrimination.
Right. If I'm remembering correctly, you know, this is in the values portion of the charter because this is a standard. This is a value that we want to set across sectors. It's not intended to be a specific legal limitation on businesses, but rather the broadly articulated value.
That works for me in abundance.
So I guess just to that point, maybe we need to just put a note there that maybe do we need to, do we need more words there that make more explicit, more descriptive what is we're talking about? Or
This is also where we use we, but in the instance of we in the last section right there by my initials, I'm wondering if that's where we want to specify who those standards apply to. Or Melanie, was that the purpose of saying in all aspects of governance, business, and service delivery?
As I recall, this was a comment that came from Commissioner. So I think we'll have to go back and just get a little better sense of what was intended. But your general statement about this being a broadly articulated value statement was also my understanding.
Forgive me, but I was under the impression we wanted to have an actual vote today on the preamble. Is that not the case?
It was determined that we don't necessarily have to vote on it today. We're not going to include it in the interim staff report. And if there is some additional noodling, we want to put it to bed, no doubt. And essentially we would take it offline, or not take it offline. And have this basis from which we're working, make some additional adjustments as necessary, and then we can bring it back for a final vote if we're not ready to vote today. Is that correct, Anusha?
That sounds right. You know, the goal is that we do want to get a draft out to the public for review and for comment, but it doesn't have to be in the interim report. So we don't need the vote today, but we do want to aim to have a more complete draft that the commission feels good with to get out, you know, in the coming weeks and months. We can consider it at our October meeting. I think it has yet to be determined when exactly makes sense, but we do have time.
Madam Chair, if I can, I would raise one other thing that I was also hesitant to bring up, but I'll bring it up. And it is the section that begins, "We condemn." I just worry a little bit about condemning things as atrocious and as horrible as they are in a document like this. Is the only place where we use a verb like that. And I just wondered if there's another way to approach this and get the same message across without that particular language.
I see what you're saying. And this speaks a little bit more to what I think Phil was speaking to this in a certain respect. The language. Okay. Do you have any suggestions, or is there something maybe we should noodle a little more?
I don't know. I mean, so yeah, so let me try this. I mean, it pales in comparison to a word like condemn, but you know, something, you know, we, I hate to even say it, but we recognize the profound harms of the legacies of racism, etc., enslavement, and we can do the list, or we can say we recognize the profound harms of those legacies, and we act intentionally to ensure blah blah blah. But something like that.
Yes, I agree. And then what I'm appreciating is that last line in paragraph before needs to come down into this paragraph. That's what we're talking about in the line above.
At the beginning of this paragraph, or?
So that line, the enduring, essentially the legacies of which that we're referencing here are these very legacies. Yeah, I will say that now all of a sudden that legacies, the word legacies itself, I don't know if that is language that would be readily understood. You know, in many communities, legacy is seen as a positive. association connotation. So that's something to keep in mind. I think we've done some very good work here. And the contributions have been many and significant. Commissioner Mata, you kicked us off. And I just want to make sure that we have you in here, that I see Commissioner Yu and Commissioner Coy want to add more. Is Commissioner Mata still with us? Maybe not in this moment. Commissioner Yu?
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can merge the enduring pain, that sentence, into exactly what we're saying. So maybe it reads like, we recognize the profound harm and the enduring pain and trauma, the loss. Maybe we need to marry those two sentences together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that serves as an example. Is that what, have we already agreed to that? Am I just repeating somebody else's idea?
We're on the same page.
Okay, great.
Commissioner Coy?
Yeah, it's this way we can maybe add in the thing about the proactively to redress these things and these things. Well, the things is not the right word, but to redress and proactive. I mean, to level the playing field or something, and then intentionally to ensure, so then there's some kind of potential redress. I'm not sure redress is the right, or compensation, whatever is the right word, but the concept, it's like there's something that I thought is important.
Remedy?
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't know what other commissioners, feel or could add to this. Because I feel like there's got to be something that we can help to level the playing field, so then then we also proactively, intentionally to ensure, so there's got to be something in the middle somewhere there,
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very helpful. Are there others? I just want to make sure that I'm not missing people. Okay. If there are no further comments, edits at this point, what we will ask our executive director and general counsel to do is to, working with other members of the team, make the edits. There may be some, there's some work that needs to be done with some of the ideas that were presented that aren't yet thoroughly fleshed out or reflected in the actual sentence structures. And then what I would ask is that we try to turn this around, like in the next several days, and then put it to bed. Do we need a commission vote to actually share it with the public?
I'm not sure that we need a vote. I'm trying to recall the language from the resolution that was approved, whether it would include this, and I don't have it in front of me. So we might need to get back to you on that.
The resolution was specific to the interim report, and this would be outside of the interim report. in terms of where we would share and present it. I would venture to say we don't need a vote. The question is, we may want one. If we feel like we're at a close enough place, we could consider one with, some revisions to come after this meeting.
Commissioner, is that Commissioner Garrido?
Even if you want to do it for symbolic reasons.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you heard what I said.
I did not.
Okay. Hopefully you're hearing me now.
Yes.
Okay. What I suggested was I don't believe we could take a vote on an incomplete document.
Right.
So perhaps we had to table this until we have a final document and then do a motion at that point.
Good deal. I think we're fine with that. And when is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is October 19th.
Okay. If need be, we can call it, if we want to move it sooner, we can call a special abbreviated meeting for the purpose of finalizing the preamble to then be released, or a resolution. Is that correct?
We could do that, or we could do it at the October 19th meeting.
Okay, I'm just thinking timeline. Okay, good deal. So I'm going to bring this discussion to a close. That does not mean that commissioners cannot send additional comments to the staff, and the staff may of course follow up directly with you to make sure that they've captured the essence of what you've presented, if we haven't already. And I'm sorry, it seems like we're having some challenges with our interpreters.
I think we can remove the screen share at this point.
Okay.
We can email out what we have at this point in time so that you can provide further input and to inform our discussions.
Okay. Just going to make sure that there is no further business for this meeting. There being none, is there any additional business? Are there any questions, comments, issues that any commission members would like to present, would like to voice at this time? It seems that we are all is good. We are ready to close out this meeting. I think that I wanted it to be noted that this may be the first time that we've ended with 15 minutes to spare. But I feel we've had a very thoughtful and productive conversation. And I do want to take a minute just to thank the commissioners for their active and meaningful participation, and the staff for the work that they did to produce this draft preamble and to engage with us. And I also just want to commend the staff for the work that they've done to produce the interim staff report. And so there being no additional business, Commissioner Thompson, did you want to say a word?
I was just going to ask if you, Chairwoman, would just say a word about Haiti to close us out, because I just feel something really relevant to many people in our city and community happen here. I just feel like you should say something. We should say something.
I very much appreciate that suggestion. And I just want to personally begin with letting everyone know that I continue to be in fervent prayer for the people of Haiti, those who continue to reside in Haiti, and those who have been displaced for many years now, not just because of the current situation with respect to the assassination of the last president, the earthquake, and the hurricane that just hit hit Haiti, but the earthquake that is now, I guess, when they're now still living out the 11 plus years of devastation from the earthquake that hit in 2010 that essentially caused many Haitians to turn to other lands in South America and in Central America, as well as here in the United States. And so I'm praying for everyone, and what we are seeing, at least from my vantage point, as it concerns how Haitians, most recently those who turned to the United States and showed up in Del Rio, Texas, at one of the border crossings between Mexico and the United States. The treatment that they received was inhumane. The denial of basic critical needs, health care needs, housing, critical housing supports, and ample food and water, as well as sleeping arrangements, as they fled from South America and Central America through Mexico to the United States border seeking asylum, and then to be essentially just kind of left there until a spotlight was put on them, and then for the nation, for the United States, to invoke Title 42 to essentially, deport many of them, citing a COVID pandemic as the reason why, but not lifting a finger to provide critical COVID prevention supports, such as COVID testing and vaccinations. I think, from my vantage point, and I am speaking as Jennifer Jones Austin, but from my vantage point, it's yet another example of how this nation treats people of a darker hue differently than it does others. Over the course of the last several weeks, we've seen many people from Afghanistan be granted asylum here in these United States, but yet we could not find the same compassion for the people of Haiti. And so I'm speaking out about this however I can. I will add that I noted with some people, I traveled on a delegation led by Reverend Al Sharpton to the border this past Thursday, and we just saw the atrocious conditions in which people were being kept. And what I shared with him, and I'll share it with you all, is that what I couldn't help but appreciate is that we have Haitians who are seeking the protection and the supports that this nation is very able to provide, coming here, trying to get a better life, better education, quality health care, jobs with livable wages. They're coming here seeking that. And perhaps they don't really appreciate that here in America still today, quality education and quality healthcare and jobs with livable wages are not in full supply for those of a darker hue, people who look very much like them. So I should say much work to be done. And if ever we should doubt that the nation, we've made some progress, but the treatment of Haitians just in the last few weeks is great evidence, is the most ample evidence of the work that must be done, the work that has to continue. And it's very reflective of the work that we're seeking to do here. Thank you, Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to bring this meeting to a close. Thank all who've listened in from the public. And again, thanking the commissioners and the staff for all that we're striving to do together. I wish you all a very good evening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.